Mason Hart had a very simple rule for surviving at Linfield Creative Agency: stay invisible, do your work, submit it on time. Do not make eye contact with director Callum Reed. Go home, sleep, repeat. It sounded easy. It was not easy. Especially when Callum Reed sat just 20 feet away from Mason's desk, separated only by a glass wall and what Mason liked to call the emotional equivalent of the Arctic Ocean. Mason had worked at Linfield for 8 months. In those 8 months, Callum had spoken to him exactly 11 times. Mason had counted. 7 of those times were corrections. 2 were instructions. One was a cold move when Mason accidentally stood in front of the coffee machine that Callum needed. And one, the most confusing one, was a quiet good, after Mason had stayed until midnight to fix a client presentation. Just good, nothing else. No name, no eye contact. Callum had looked at the screen, said the word into the air, and walked out. Mason had gone home that night and told his best friend Yori about it. He said good to me today. Mason had whispered into the phone like it was breaking news. Mason, Yori had said, you need a hobby. But the thing was, Mason was not imagining it. There was something about Callum Reed that made the whole office hold its breath. He was tall, always dressed perfectly, always carrying a coffee that never seemed to get cold. He had dark hair that he pushed back with one hand when he was thinking. He did not smile much. When he walked through the office, people straightened in their chairs without realizing it. He was not cruel, he was just distant, like a star, very bright, very far away, and Mason, for reasons he could not explain and refused to examine, could not stop noticing him. It was a Thursday morning when everything changed. Mason had woken up with a headache. Not a bad one, just the kind that sits behind your eyes and makes everything feel slightly too loud. He took 2 painkillers, drank his coffee too fast, burned his tongue, and arrived at the office 3 minutes late. He slid into his chair, opened his laptop, and pulled up the design file he had been working on all week. A brand campaign for a skincare company. Clean lines, soft colors. He was almost done. Then Callum walked past, and Mason heard something, not with his ears. It was more like a voice landing inside his head. Clear and low and unmistakably Callum's voice. That color palette is better than yesterday. Mason looked up fast. Callum was already past his desk, not even glancing at him, walking toward his office with his coffee in hand. Mason blinked. He looked around. Nobody else had reacted. His coworker Dina was typing. The guy 2 desks over was eating a granola bar. Everything was normal. Mason looked back at his screen, at the color palette, the one he had changed this morning. He must have imagined it. That was the only explanation. The headache, the burned tongue, the lack of sleep. He was hallucinating, his boss's voice giving him design feedback inside his skull. Completely normal Thursday. He went back to work. 20 minutes later, Callum walked back the other way. He stopped near the printer, waited for a document, and did not look at Mason once. And again, that voice. He always comes in looking like he barely made it out of bed, and somehow it still works. Mason's hand slipped on his mouse. His cursor dragged a whole text box across the screen. He sat very still. That had been about him. He knew it. He had no reason to know it, but he knew it the same way you know when someone is looking at you from across a room. It was about him. Callum picked up his document and walked away without a single glance in Mason's direction. Mason pressed both hands flat on his desk and breathed slowly. Okay. He was either losing his mind or something very, very strange was happening. He decided to test it.
Carefully.
Scientifically. He would wait for Callum to walk by again and see if he heard anything. He waited 40 minutes. Callum did not come out of his office. Mason got up and went to refill his water bottle. He walked past Callum's glass office. Callum was on a call, standing at his desk, very focused, not looking up. He needs to stop walking so close to my office. It's distracting. Mason walked faster. He made it to the water station, filled his bottle, and stood there for a solid 10 seconds, just staring at the wall. The voice had been flustered, a little annoyed, but not mean, and it had been about Mason, about him being distracting. Mason Hart, the most invisible person in this office, was apparently distracting his cold, untouchable, impossible to read boss. He walked back to his desk, sat down, opened a new document, typed one sentence in big letters. I can hear Callum Reed's thoughts, and I am not okay. He deleted it immediately. He was so not okay. By lunchtime, Mason had a list. It was a mental list because writing it down felt too real, but it existed very clearly in his head. Things Callum Reed had thought near Mason today. 1. That color palette is better than yesterday. 2. He always comes in looking like he barely made it out of bed, and somehow it still works. 3. He needs to stop walking so close to my office. It's distracting. 4. Is he eating lunch at his desk again? He should go outside. That last one had floated over while Mason was unwrapping a sandwich at 12:15. He had looked up. Callum had been walking to the break room, not even glancing his way. Mason had gone outside. He had sat on the bench near the front of the building in the mild afternoon air, eaten his sandwich, and had a very serious conversation with himself about reality. The conclusion he reached was not helpful. It was real. Whatever this was, it was real. He was hearing Callum's thoughts, and those thoughts were weird. Not mean, not professional. Personal. Observant. About Mason specifically. When Mason came back inside, Yori called. Mason stepped into the stairwell to answer. You sound terrible, Yori said immediately. I can hear my boss's thoughts. Silence. Like, his actual thoughts, Mason said. Mason, it started this morning. I have confirmed it 4 separate times. He thinks I'm distracting. He noticed I changed my color palette. He thinks I should eat outside. More silence. Are you sure you're not just really good at reading people? Yori offered. Yori. I heard his voice, inside my head, without him speaking. Okay, Yori said in the tone of someone deciding to take this seriously. Okay, when did it start? This morning. When he walked past my desk. Did anything happen before that? Did you touch something weird? Eat something strange? Fall and hit your head? I burned my tongue on coffee. That wouldn't do it. I know that. Have you heard anyone else's thoughts? Mason paused. He had not tried. He pushed open the stairwell door a crack and focused on Dina, who was walking past in the hallway. Nothing. He focused on the guy with the granola bar, whose name was Ren. Nothing. He let the door close. No, just Callum. Just your boss, Yori repeated slowly. The one you definitely don't have feelings for. I don't have feelings for him. You texted me about him saying one word to you. That was. Mason stopped. This conversation is not helping. I think the universe is trying to tell you something. The universe needs to mind its business. He hung up and stood in the stairwell alone for a moment. Then he went back to his desk because he was a professional, and he had a campaign to finish. Callum stepped out of his office at 3 p.m. for more coffee. Mason kept his eyes on his screen. He's been staring at that screen for hours. His posture is going to suffer. Mason sat up straighter. There we go. Mason froze. Could Callum know? No, that was impossible. The thoughts only went one direction. Callum could not hear Mason reacting to his thoughts. That would be a completely different and much more terrifying situation. He exhaled. The afternoon passed with more small moments. Callum reviewed a team project near Mason's area and thought, clearly and simply, Hart's section is the strongest part of this. He said nothing aloud. He nodded at the overall presentation. He walked away. Mason had contributed the most to that project. He knew that. He had worked 3 late nights on it, but nobody had said anything, and he had started to wonder if it even mattered. Now he knew. It mattered, at least to Callum. That felt complicated, because here was the problem. Mason had spent 8 months telling himself that Callum Reed was simply cold, distant, uninterested, that whatever Mason felt when Callum said good, that one night was just his own brain being silly and lonely. But the thoughts told a different story. Callum noticed Mason's work. Callum noticed Mason's lunch. Callum noticed Mason's posture and his color choices and the way he came in every morning looking slightly rumpled. Callum noticed Mason a lot. And then, at 5:47 p.m., as the office emptied and Mason was saving the final version of his campaign file, Callum walked past his desk one last time. He did not stop. He did not look, but the thought came through like a quiet bell. I want to kiss Mason Hart. The file saved. The screen sat still. The office hummed with the sound of computers and distant traffic. Mason did not move for a full 30 seconds. Then he very carefully closed his laptop, picked up his bag, and walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. He waited. He got in. He pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. Then he pressed his back against the elevator wall, slid down until he was sitting on the floor, and put his face in his hands. Callum Reed wanted to kiss him. His boss. His cold, distant, barely speaks to him boss. Wanted to kiss him. The elevator reached the lobby. Mason stayed on the floor for one more second. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, walked out of the building, and called Yori. You were right, he said. I know, said Yori. About which part? All of it. The weekend was supposed to give Mason time to think. It did not. He reorganized his bookshelf on Saturday. He went for a run. He made soup from scratch even though he was not sick. He sat on his couch with a blanket and tried to watch a show, and kept pausing it to stare at the ceiling. I want to kiss Mason Hart. The words played in a loop. Clear, quiet, Callum's voice. Here was the thing. Mason had never thought of himself as someone people wanted. He was not invisible in a dramatic way, not the kind of person who got overlooked because of something dark or painful. He was just ordinary. He did good work. He was friendly. He made decent coffee and remembered coworkers' birthdays and did not cause problems. Nobody had ever described him as distracting before. Yori came over Sunday afternoon with bubble tea and zero patience for Mason's spiral. Let me understand this, she said, sitting cross-legged on his couch, stirring her drink. Your boss has secret feelings for you, which you only know because of a mystery ability that appeared from nowhere, and your response is to reorganize your bookshelf. The bookshelf needed it. Mason, what am I supposed to do, Yori? He sat across from her, pulling the blanket over his lap. Walk in Monday and say, hey, I know you want to kiss me because I can hear your thoughts? Obviously not. Then what? She looked at him thoughtfully. What do you feel? Mason looked at his soup pot, still sitting on the stove. I don't know, he said, and he meant it, because there was a big difference between finding your boss interesting and actually having feelings for him. Between noticing someone and this. You counted how many times he spoke to you, Yori said gently. 11. You remember each one. That's just a good memory. You stayed until midnight for his project and talked about it for a week. I was proud of the work. Mason. She put her cup down. You like him. He pulled the blanket up higher. He's my boss. That's not a denial. It was not a denial. He knew that. She knew that. The blanket was not helping. Even if I do, Mason said slowly. What happens now? He doesn't know I know. He doesn't think I know. And I can't use information I got from inside his head. That's not fair to him. Yori looked at him for a long moment. That's surprisingly mature. I have my moments. So you go in Monday and act normal. I go in Monday and act normal, he agreed. Monday was not normal. Mason arrived on time, got his coffee, sat at his desk. Callum arrived 12 minutes later, said good morning to the general office, and disappeared into the glass room. Normal so far. Then at 10 a.m., the head of accounts, a sharp woman named Director Park, called a team meeting. Everyone filed into the large conference room. Mason sat near the middle. Callum sat at the head of the table. Director Park pulled up numbers. The skincare campaign, Mason's campaign, had been submitted to the client Friday afternoon. The client had responded over the weekend. They loved it. They had approved the full concept and wanted to move to production immediately. The room applauded. Director Park smiled. People looked at the team, and then Callum said clearly, in front of everyone, Hart carried this campaign. The room shifted. Heads turned toward Mason. Mason felt his face go warm. The concept, the color direction, the final layout. That was Hart's work, Callum said. His voice was even, professional. He looked at Mason the way he looked at everything, steady, unreadable. Good work. 2 words. The same 2 words from 8 months ago, but this time in front of everyone. Thank you, Mason managed. His voice came out calm. Good. The meeting continued. Mason spent the rest of it staring at his notepad and not at Callum. But inside, the voice, he's trying not to smile. I can see it. Why does that make everything harder? Mason pressed his pen down on the notepad and wrote absolutely nothing for the next 20 minutes. This was the problem with knowing. Every moment now had 2 layers. What was on the surface and what was underneath. And Mason had to keep acting like he could only see the surface. It was exhausting. And it made everything so much more real. Because the Callum in those thoughts was not the cold director with the perfect suits. He was someone who noticed Mason's smile, who thought his work was the strongest, who wanted. Mason stopped that thought firmly. Act normal. Do your work. Do not fall for the voice inside your head. He lasted until 3 p.m. Then Callum came to his desk, actually walked over and stood there to hand him a printed brief for the next project. This one's yours from the start, Callum said. Full creative lead. Mason looked up. This close, Callum's eyes were darker than he usually noticed. He looked a little tired, a little something else. Really? Mason said. You've earned it. Their hands touched for 1 second when Mason took the brief. Don't make it obvious, Callum. Don't make it obvious. Mason looked down at the brief. He was so in trouble. The brief was for a travel company. Open concept. Big creative freedom. Mason should have been excited. He was excited. Mostly. Underneath the part of his brain that was still playing, "Don't make it obvious, Callum," on a loop. He threw himself into the work. Concepts, mood boards, color stories. He stayed late Tuesday and Wednesday, not because anyone asked him to, but because when he was working, he was not thinking about other things. At least, he was trying not to. Thursday, Callum stopped by his desk at noon. Have you eaten? Mason looked up. Sorry, lunch. Callum said it simply, like it was a normal question. Have you had it? Not yet. A pause. There's a good place 2 blocks over. I'm going now if you want to come. The whole office had gone quiet in the specific way that offices do when something unexpected happens, and everyone pretends they are not listening. Mason looked at Callum. Callum looked back, steady, unreadable, the same face he always had. Please say yes. Sure, Mason said. Let me get my jacket. They walked out together. The office watched them go. Mason could feel it. The restaurant was small, warm, with wooden tables and a handwritten menu on a chalkboard. Callum had clearly been here before. He ordered without looking at the menu. Mason ordered the same thing because he was not actually reading the words. They sat across from each other. This was the first time Mason had ever sat directly across from Callum with nothing between them. No desk, no glass wall, no presentation. Just a table and the soft noise of a lunch crowd. Callum looked different out here. Still perfectly dressed, still the same person, but somehow less like a director, and more like just a man having lunch. He held his water glass and looked out the window for a moment. Say something. You asked him here. Say something, you absolute coward. Mason hid his expression behind his menu. Is the food good? Mason asked. Very. Callum looked back. I come here most Thursdays. I didn't know that. There's no reason you would. A quiet settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Like neither of them quite knew what this was. The brief you gave me, Mason said. The travel one. I've been working on a concept. Callum nodded. I'd like to see it when you're ready. I was thinking something about the feeling of arriving somewhere new. That first moment when you step off and you don't know anything yet, everything is open. Callum was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a good instinct. Most travel campaigns focus on the destination. That's about the person. Exactly. Their food arrived. Mason ate and tried to be normal and tried not to hear things. He failed at the last part. He gets it immediately, every single time. I shouldn't have invited him. This is harder. He has sauce on the corner of his mouth, and I am not going to say anything. Mason grabbed his napkin and wiped his mouth. Callum looked out the window again. Can I ask you something? Mason said. Callum looked back. Yes. Why did you give me full creative lead? There are senior designers who've been here longer. Callum considered him for a moment. Because they design what they think I want. You design what's true. Mason did not know what to do with that. He looked at his plate. Thank you. It's an observation. But Callum's voice was a little softer than usual. Stop looking at him like that. He's your employee. This was a mistake. Mason looked up. Callum had looked away again, jaw slightly tight. The thing about hearing someone's thoughts was that you heard the whole fight, not just the feeling, but the argument against the feeling. The part that said, stop, and not allowed, and this was a mistake. And Mason understood that, because he was having the same argument. They walked back to the office mostly in silence. It was not a bad silence. When they reached the building, Callum held the door. The concept sounds strong, he said. Don't overthink the execution. I won't, Mason said. They went back to their desks, the glass wall between them, the 20 feet. Everything the same. Except it was not the same at all, and they both knew it. And neither of them could say so. On Friday morning, Mason could not hear anything. He walked past Callum in the hallway. Nothing. He sat at his desk while Callum moved around the office. Nothing. He went to refill his water past the glass office, focused hard. Silence. He did not know if this was better or worse. He told Yori at lunch, sitting on the outdoor bench that had become his regular spot. It stopped, he said, completely. Complete silence. I can't hear him at all. Yori was quiet for a moment. Maybe it was never meant to be permanent. Then what was the point? Mason. She said his name carefully. Maybe the point was just for you to know. So you could stop assuming he didn't care. So you could stop hiding. He stared at his sandwich. I can't do anything with it, Yori. He's my boss. He'd never, even if he wanted to, he'd never act on it. You heard what I said. His own thoughts told him to stop. People talk themselves out of things they want all the time, she said. Doesn't mean they don't want them. He went back inside. The afternoon was strange. Callum was in meetings most of it. Mason worked on his travel campaign and it was going well, genuinely well, the kind of creative momentum that made hours disappear. By 6, the office had mostly cleared. Mason was finishing notes on his concept board when he heard footsteps. Callum stopped at his desk. Still here? He said. Just finishing. Mason looked up. You too? I had calls. He looked at Mason's screen, at the mood board, at the concept layout Mason had been building all week. He was quiet for a moment. This is exceptional, Callum said. Not good. Exceptional. Mason felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you. The arrival concept, the open door. You made it feel personal without making it sentimental. He looked at Mason directly. This is the best thing you've done here. 8 months of practice, Mason said. Something moved across Callum's face, quick, like a curtain shifting in a window. Then it settled back to neutral. Don't stay too late, he said. He picked up his coat from the back of his chair, said goodnight to the last few people still at their desks, and left. Mason sat alone in the quieting office. The voice was gone, but the words, the real words, the spoken ones, were still there. Exceptional. Maybe, Mason thought. He did not need to hear the thoughts anymore. Maybe he had already heard the part that mattered. Maybe now he just needed to figure out what to do with it. He packed his bag, turned off his monitor, walked to the elevator, and he made a decision, not a big dramatic one. Just a small quiet decision that sat warm in the center of his chest. He was not going to hide anymore. The following week, Mason nearly ruined everything. It was Tuesday. The travel campaign presentation was scheduled for Thursday. Client call, full team, Callum leading it. Mason had been given the floor for the creative section. He had prepared everything. He was ready. What he was not ready for was overhearing Callum on the phone. He had not heard Callum's thoughts since Friday. But Tuesday afternoon, walking past the small side hallway near the copy room, he heard Callum's actual voice through the partially open door of the unused office. Callum, sometimes used for private calls. I know how it looks, CO. That's exactly why I haven't done anything. A pause. Because it's not appropriate. He works for me. Another pause. I don't need advice on this. I need you to stop bringing it up. Mason walked faster. He should not have heard that. He walked to the bathroom, ran cold water over his wrists, and stood there for a moment. He works for me. That was the wall. The real one. Not coldness, not disinterest. The wall was ethics and position and all the good reasons that made Callum the kind of person who would talk himself out of something he wanted. Mason looked at himself in the mirror. He thought about hiding, about going back to invisible, about how much easier it would be. Then he thought about the lunch, about exceptional, about 20 feet of glass and 8 months of good. He went back to his desk. He worked until 7. When he finally looked up, the office was empty, except for Callum's light still on behind the glass. Mason stood up. He walked to Callum's office. He knocked on the open door. Callum looked up. I wanted to ask, Mason said, keeping his voice steady. If you had time to look at the final layout before Thursday, there's one section I'm not sure about. Callum studied him for a moment, then he nodded. Come in. Mason came in. He pulled up the file on his laptop and set it on Callum's desk. They both leaned over it. This close, Mason could smell Callum's cologne. Something clean and quiet. He focused on the screen. This section, Mason said, pointing. The arrival sequence. I think it might be too slow. Callum leaned in slightly. He scrolled through the frame slowly. No, he said. The pacing is right. Fast would make it generic. Slow makes the viewer feel it. You think so? I know so, he straightened. They were close, not inappropriately. Just the natural closeness of two people looking at the same screen. Callum stepped back slightly. The instinct you had from the beginning was right. Trust it. It's easier to trust it when someone else sees it too, Mason said. Callum looked at him. Mason held the eye contact. He had not planned to say the next thing, but the word came out anyway, quiet and honest. I notice you more than I should. The office was completely silent. Callum's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did, a shift, like a door that had been locked a long time moving slightly on its hinges. Mason, he said, quiet, warning, but not cold. I know, Mason said. I know what you're going to say. I'm not asking for anything. I didn't want to keep pretending I don't. He picked up his laptop. The presentation is ready. Thursday will go well. He walked to the door. Good night, Callum. He left. He made it to the elevator, pressed the button, and stood there with his heart going absolutely wild in his chest. He had said it. He had actually said it. The elevator came. He got in. His phone buzzed. A message from Callum's number. They had each other's contacts for work. Mason had never received a personal message from him. It said, Good night, Mason. Just that. 2 words. But his name, his actual name, not Hart. Mason stared at the screen the whole elevator ride down. Mason expected awkward. He prepared for awkward. He had a whole plan for getting through awkward. Arrive on time, be professional, keep his head down, let things reset. Wednesday morning, Callum was not in the office. His assistant Priya mentioned it casually. Director Reed is working remotely today. He'll be back Thursday for the client call. Mason said okay and sat at his desk and felt strange, not relieved, not glad. Strangely hollow, like something he had been bracing against had been taken away. He worked. He revised the campaign one last time. He sent Callum the final files at noon. At 12:07, he got an email back. Work email, formal, exactly as it should be. Approved, no changes needed. See you Thursday. See Reed, professional, clean, correct. Mason stared at it, then his phone buzzed, personal number. Callum. Are you okay? Mason looked at those 3 words for a long time. He typed back, Yes, are you? A pause. Then, I owe you a real conversation. Mason typed, You don't owe me anything. I know. I want to have it anyway, after Thursday. Mason put his phone face down on his desk. He pressed one hand flat on the surface. He breathed, after Thursday. He could wait until after Thursday. He could absolutely wait. He did not sleep well Wednesday night. Thursday morning, he put on his best shirt, dark green, the one Yori always said looked good on him, and arrived 5 minutes early. The team was already gathering. The clients would join by video. The conference room was set up. Callum arrived at 8:58, 2 minutes before the call. He walked in, placed his things at the head of the table, and looked around the room. His eyes found Mason. He nodded. Small, brief, professional. Mason nodded back. The call went perfectly. Callum opened it. Director Park covered the strategy. And then Callum said, I'll hand over to Mason Hart, who will walk you through the creative direction. Mason stood up. He clicked his first slide. He looked at the room, at the faces on the screen, at the concept he had built from nothing over 2 weeks. He talked about arrival. About that first moment when everything is open. About making the audience feel like the journey was theirs. The clients were quiet during his presentation. Then the lead client, a woman named Rosario, said, This is exactly what we wanted and didn't know how to ask for. This is beautiful. The team applauded. Director Park beamed. Mason sat down. From across the table, Callum watched him with an expression Mason could not name. Not the neutral director face. Something much more real. There he is, came a voice, faint, barely a whisper, like a signal coming from very far away. There he is. Mason looked up. Callum looked away. The meeting wrapped. People filed out. Congratulations everywhere. Mason stayed to pack up the presentation equipment. When the room was empty, Callum was still there. Well done, he said. Thank you. They stood on opposite sides of the conference table. Long table. Wide room. But it felt like the smallest space Mason had ever been in. You said after Thursday? Mason said. Callum exhaled. He pulled out a chair and sat down, which was not what Mason expected. Callum sat like he was tired, like he had been holding something for a long time and just put it down. Sit, Callum said. Mason sat. Callum was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table, then at his hands, then at Mason. I've been in this industry for 12 years, he said. I have worked very hard to be the kind of person who does not make things complicated, who keeps lines clear, who does the job and does it well and doesn't. He stopped. I have rules. I know, Mason said. You knowing doesn't make them disappear. I know that too. Callum looked at him. Then why did you say what you said Tuesday night? Mason thought about it. The real answer, not the rehearsed one. Because I was tired of pretending I didn't feel it, even if nothing came of it. I didn't want to spend another 8 months shrinking myself down to nothing, so you wouldn't notice I existed. Callum was very still. 8 months, he repeated. You said good to me in October. After I stayed until midnight, I went home and thought about it for 3 days. Something moved across Callum's face, slow, like sunrise. Not quite a smile, but something close. One word. You don't give many. No, Callum said quietly. I don't. He looked at the table again. I noticed you very quickly. Earlier than I should have. I told myself it was because your work was strong. He paused. It wasn't only that. The room was completely still. Callum, let me finish. His voice was steady. I've had this argument with myself for months. Every reason it's wrong. Every reason I should keep the distance. And those reasons are real. They matter, Mason. This is your workplace. I have responsibility here. I won't pretend those things aren't true. But, Mason said softly. Callum looked at him, directly. The unreadable face was gone. Whatever was underneath it, tired and honest, and something Mason had only ever heard as a voice inside his head, that was what was looking at him, now. But I'm also very tired of pretending, Callum said. The silence stretched. Then Callum said, I would like to take you to dinner. Not a work lunch, not a conversation in a conference room, dinner. Outside of this office. And I would like to see what that is. Mason's chest felt like something in it had been wound very tight for a long time and had just gently loosened. Yes, Mason said. I need you to know that I take this seriously. That I'm not.
I don't do things carelessly. If we do this, I'm in it.
I know, Mason said. I know you're not careless. He thought of all the things he had heard over the past weeks. The way Callum noticed the color palette, noticed the lunch, noticed Mason's posture, fought with himself, tried to do the right thing. You're actually the opposite of careless. Callum looked at him with something almost like confusion. How do you know that? Mason smiled, just a little. You told me, in your way. Callum studied him. Then, slowly, something happened that Mason had never seen in 8 months of watching from 20 feet away. Callum smiled. Real, quiet, tucked into the corner of his mouth, but absolutely real. Saturday, Callum said. Dinner. I'll text you the place. Okay. They both stood. They picked up their things. They walked out of the conference room and back into the office, where the rest of the team was still celebrating the successful call. Everything looked the same, the desks, the glass wall, the 20 feet between where Mason sat and where Callum worked. But it was not the same at all. Saturday came. The restaurant Callum chose was warm and quiet, candles on the table, the kind of place that felt like a secret. Mason arrived first. Callum arrived exactly on time. He was not wearing a suit. Dark shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbow, no tie. Mason had never seen him like this. He looked lighter, like he had set something down and decided to leave it there. He sat across from Mason and looked at him for a moment. You look nervous, Callum said. A little, Mason admitted. Good, so do I. Mason laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes out before you decide to let it. And Callum's mouth curved in that quiet, real way again. They talked. Actually talked. Not about work, not about campaigns, but about everything else. Where Callum grew up, coastal city, lots of fog, parents who ran a small print shop, which explained a few things about his love of clean design. Where Mason grew up inland, big family, very loud household, that explained why he liked quiet so much.
Books they had read.
Places they wanted to go, small things, important things. At one point, Callum said, "You're very easy to talk to. I didn't expect that." "You never talk to me enough to find out," Mason said. "I know," said it simply, honestly. "You can stop," Mason said, being so careful. Callum looked at him across the table. The candlelight was doing soft things to the room. Outside, the city moved in its usual way, indifferent and busy. "I'm learning," Callum said. After dinner, they stood on the sidewalk outside. The night was mild. The city hummed. Callum looked at Mason. He lifted one hand, slowly, carefully, giving Mason every chance to step back, and tucked a piece of hair back from Mason's forehead. His fingers barely grazed Mason's temple. "I've wanted to do that for months," he said quietly. "I know," Mason said. Callum raised an eyebrow, slightly amused. "How?" Mason smiled.
You told me, in your way.
Later, much later, when Mason was home, warm and quiet in his apartment, and his phone buzzed with a message from Callum. "I had a good time tonight." Mason sat on his couch and thought about everything. About a Thursday morning with a headache and a burned tongue. About a voice landing inside his head like a secret too big to hold. About what it felt like to hear someone fighting with themselves over you, wanting you, trying so hard to do the right thing. He thought about how the voice had gone quiet, and how maybe that was because he had stopped needing it. Because Callum had started speaking. He typed back, "Me too. Same time next week?" 3 seconds. Then, "Yes." Mason put his phone down. He leaned back on the couch. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then smiled at nothing in particular. Being loved, he thought, was not always loud. Sometimes it was a voice inside your head that didn't belong to you. Sometimes it was a word, good, exceptional. Your name said like it meant something. Sometimes it was a man who fought with himself for months, and then finally, sat down across from you and said, "I'm tired of pretending too." Mason was done pretending. He was, for the first time in a long time, exactly where he wanted to be.